this edition of Slugger TV. We're hosting this in partnership with Ulster Bank as part of our Reset series. And in this episode, we're going to be looking at the future of Belfast City Centre. And to go through this very interesting topic, we have Glyn Roberts from Retail Northern Ireland. We have Suzanne Wylie, who is the Chief Executive of Belfast City Council. And we have Colin Neill, who is from Hospitality Ulster. Colin, I want to come to you first. How has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the city centre?
I don't use the word severe lightly, but severe. We've seen capacity reduced time and time again. Last Friday night we've seen our capacity reduced to 2 households on each table. That leaves us, we're not in this for profit. We're in this trying to survive, and we're now in a knife edge, whether we can survive or not.
Okay. And Suzanne, obviously you had the unfortunate job of heading up the council, and I know the council had a big response to it. Well, what have you seen, and you must be inundated with people coming to you with concerns and queries?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, obviously, there's the health impact and the impact on people's lives, and that means we've had lots of people furloughed. About 36,000 people in Belfast alone furloughed, and we also have had people being made redundant. So the claimant count has doubled to 6.6%. So we have to stop that from going any further, and that is the job of all of us here today to make sure we do that. We've also had big impact on sectors like the hospitality sector, like tourism, of course, and also I think we've had a big impact on the city centre itself. So clearly there are fewer people in offices, more people working from home, less footfall. So when we went into lockdown at first, footfall went through the floor. But of course, with the Help Out, Eat Out to Help Out scheme that happened, we got footfall back into the city centre. And actually, the city centre was performing in the last few weeks better than some of the other regional cities across the UK in terms of footfall. So I think that scheme has been really helpful. Obviously, transport's been affected significantly as well in and out of the city, but we have seen people be more active in terms of their choice of transport, which is really good to see as well. Of course, businesses have adapted their models really quickly and gone online much quicker than I think if you'd asked them before March that they would have anticipated that they could do that. So there are some positives there as well, and I'm sure we'll come and talk about some of those too.
Okay, Glyn, the retail sector obviously hugely impacted by this. How have you seen?
Well, I think speaking generally, I think we've moved from high street crisis to high street emergency. It's had a very severe impact on, as Suzanne said, on footfall. I think that Belfast City Centre is going through a huge amount of difficulty, and I think that in one sense that what we have seen, because so many people are remote working, they're home working, we've actually saw trade in a lot of the neighbouring towns clustered around the Belfast City Council area doing quite well, because many of those workers are staying local to shop and socialise, and that's coming at the impact of Belfast City Centre. So one of the things we're very keen to see is get more office workers back into their place of work, because that will help drive footfall for many retailers and indeed hospitality as well. So I think that's something that I think is a key ask, and one of the things that we have been successful in lobbying for is a High Streets Task Force, which the executive is putting together. So we want to see that return of the office workers as part of their work. Now, we've seen good examples of where big corporates have actually been able to get their staff back on a rotational basis, on a part-time basis. And I think what we need to see the executive do is helping those businesses do that, but it's absolutely vital for footfall. What I would say, looking at the medium to long term, I am optimistic that obviously the city can bounce back from this. We have things like the Tribeca application, Sirocco, Ulster University. We have lots of exciting developments in the city centre that I think that could raise Belfast's potential. And there's a reason why Belfast could not be at some point in the top 10 retail destinations in the UK in the longer term. So we face an immediate crisis, but I do think I am much more optimistic in the medium to long term of the potential of this city centre and the city as a whole.
And Colin, how are you, because obviously the executive fairly recently has changed the regulations for bars again. Obviously, kicking out time is now 10:30 last orders, and then 11
Yes.
p.m. is now, and obviously up in Derry now, it's a totally different scenario as well. How is that playing, and how do you think that's impacting kind of the model to try, as Glyn has said, to get the city centre kind of back?
Look again, we've seen that the curfew, effective curfew announced, and that came on the back of 2 previous announcements about new legally enforceable regulations, many of which we asked for because we wanted to make sure nobody had a hiding place if they were being irresponsible in our industry. But we're seeing these coming in such a succession, you have no chance to work out, did the other one work? What is the impact of those measures? Because we probably have the most legally enforceable measures now of anywhere on this island and indeed the UK. Early days, because the curfew only came into play on Wednesday night at midnight. But look, it does reduce the offer of to our customers. And look, we put health first because the health of our customers, the health of our staff, the health of our families, we're part of society. But it does get to the point of why were we opened? We were reopened to save jobs and save businesses safely. We think we've done an incredible amount of work to do it safely. And I think it really now we are at the point we need to see the evidence for these decisions. We need to know, one, explain to us why it's happening, but 2, where within our industry, if we are at fault, where is it? So we can actually fix that. Because it's a bit like if you can't control speeding in the roads, do you decide to ban all white cars because they're more popular, therefore you reduce the risk? Because that's what this feels like.
Okay.
I think we all have a role in that, really, and that's the important thing, that we are joined up in this, because if you think about the restrictions, that's obviously coming from government. If you think about personal responsibility and what people need to do and what they need to adhere to in terms of those straightforward rules, and then businesses and what they need to adhere to, and then bodies like Glyn's and Colin's, and also bodies like mine, we have people out there on the street, not to crack down on every single pub that's open, not at all, or retailer, to actually provide confidence to people that these places are safe and are open and are welcoming and have all the right measures in place. And I think working together we can absolutely achieve that, and that's something government needs to take cognizance of when they're making these kind of rules.
I think too, in fairness, Suzanne and I were on the phone even before new regulations come out, working out guides, working out how we all interpret it. So it's we all have a responsibility. The Chief Medical Officer used the word wise up. Yes, anybody that's messing about, not behaving, wise up. But also we need to have wise legislation and implementation that does not cost people's jobs, livelihoods, and indeed maybe their home and family.
Yeah. And just one of the things that's really kind of struck me about, in Northern Ireland we had the reputation for things moving fairly slowly, but if this COVID pandemic's proved anything, it's how quickly people have innovated, and even off their own bat. It's hard to forget that in March businesses here were closing before the executive passed a regulation. What do you think about that innovation? Do you think we'll continue to see that throughout the rest of the pandemic? And do you think we could potentially see some of that remaining, hopefully, once we get past it?
Well, we've seen a lot of our members having to innovate, change on a very, very fast basis. And, I think a big shout out, because many of our members are in the food retail sector. And many of their staff were there at the height of the pandemic, ensuring that people had food and other important products. So I do think that, yes, to survive is to innovate now in terms of business, and the whole concept of the office is changing. But if I could maybe just come back to that sort of broader point. Colin and I and 6 other business groups wrote to the First and Deputy First Minister about cautioning about a second lockdown. And I think it's because people have sort of sometimes characterised this as health versus as wealth. It's not. It's actually health versus health. Because if you look at the impact the second lockdown would have on jobs and poverty and unemployment, the impact that would have on people's mental health, because we had a mental health epidemic before lockdown, before the pandemic, goodness knows where we are now, but also the physical impacts that widespread unemployment would have on our population. And that would combine with a pandemic and the impact of COVID. It's just too scary to contemplate. So it is a fine line which the executive walk every day in the decisions that they make. I do think that they need to re-engage better with business because they're rushing these laws out. Admittedly, they're operating on the best of intentions, but at times we're receiving these new regulations. In fact, not even receiving them, we have to go looking for them. So I think there's definitely, and they need to re-engage better with business. I think they need to communicate better, and I think they also need to ensure that we don't end up with an economy which is basically bust. And that we have a situation where people's health has taken a dive as a result of this. So it is a fine line that we've got to work through. We appreciate the executive has challenges, but we've also got to figure out that what we've seen in Derry and Strabane. I mean, the executive brought those forward, but they didn't outline what support they're giving to businesses in those areas. The furlough was being phased out. We're seeing that the small business grants are not going to be there anymore. We've maxed the credit card when it comes to rates relief. So, we need to be very careful about that. If we shut down the economy again, where is the support there for business? And that is the big worry, that a second lockdown could be even more impactful than the first.
I think Glyn makes a very good point. I mean, normally we have lots of scrutiny of legislation that takes years, actually, sometimes painfully years to change it. This has been done without scrutiny. We need immediate scrutiny after it. I appreciate it's an emergency. We have to react within days, sometimes hours. But why do we not have the machinery straight after that to scrutinise the legislation, refine it, and look at the evidence that supports it being brought in? I think European laws about all laws should be proportionate to the risk and proportionate to the actual offence. We need to know the evidence now.
I think just on that point, obviously, none of us would want to be in the minister's shoes having to make these kind of decisions, and they have to be made in very short order because of how this virus operates, basically. So it is very difficult, but it is that balance that I think they have that very fine line to walk along. So I think we have to appreciate that as well, that it is incredibly difficult to try and control this particular virus. I think in terms of innovation, that's the question you asked in the first place. I think that businesses have been amazing in terms of innovation. Look at some of the food businesses and their home recipes and deliveries and how that's worked, and I think people will want to continue to avail of those kind of things. Look at them spilling out onto the streets, and how government and the sector work together to enable that to happen and to be much more innovative around that. I think innovation is going to be, though, the key to the future of our economy for all types of business, not just the retail sector or the hospitality sector, but all types of business, and certainly a lot more investment in research and development, and how we can encourage and support businesses to be innovative is where we need to go in the future.
I think that's, sorry to interrupt, but I think that's really important, particularly in the hospitality sector, because we are innovating, we're adapting, but what we need now, people, to stop judging us on what you remembered us by. That shoulder-to-shoulder pub, that back-to-back restaurant isn't going to exist, and it'll be some time before even the new model comes out of that. Judge us on what we can do, not what you remember we did.
Yeah, an interesting thing about, I'll go to you on this, Glyn. I mean, we can quite often forget we're just a little over 2 years after the Primark fire, and I was walking past it today, and you forget that what a real blow that was to that part of the city centre as well, and some of the recovery. How do you think? I mean, there is, I suppose, this narrative of, well, Belfast can bounce back through everything. Sure, we made it through the Troubles, and sure, we made it through the Primark fire. Do you think that maybe is a bit of a misleading narrative in that essence about the fact that any business can only withstand so many knocks?
Yeah. Well, I think that if you look even before the pandemic, retail and our high streets were changing. They were going through what I think a reconstruction phase. In any reconstruction process, there are winners and losers. So, and I think COVID has accelerated the pace of that change. So I think you're looking at a sector that's gone through more change in maybe 1 year than it has in the last 30 years. And I think what we need to sort of develop in Belfast City Centre is almost like an ecosystem, where we're home to the natural home to all different types of business, not just retail. I think we've talked about this sort of 15-minute city centre idea. So we've got to have a vision for Belfast City Centre which is welcoming, but also somewhere where people can live, they can work, and drill it all down. Make it fun and family friendly, and I think that was one of the things that came out of the Primark fire. is that it engaged the general public in a way that it hadn't before about the future of their city centre. It got people thinking again. So again, that was one of the few positives about what happened to Primark. I think that, economy aside, I think that, I mean, there's one thing that I've been reflecting on in recent weeks, and I think where we need to, as a community and a society, is almost get back to that spirit of generosity, of partnership, of kindness, of coming together as a community that we saw in March and April and May. And I know people are frustrated, they're angry, but I think as a community we've got to dig down deep and get that sense of community, of being kind to each other, about coming together as a community. I think that is so important. If we're able to get that back, you know, where we were clapping every Thursday night for the NHS, and that was more than just focused on the NHS heroes, that was actually us coming together as a community to say, look, we're going to get through this. I think we need to get back to that spirit of generosity, of kindness that we saw in March, April and May. You know, it's not just all about politics or the economy, it is about that community spirit, and that is absolutely vital that we get back to that.
I agree with that in terms of community spirit, absolutely. But I also think to take it a stage further than that, the community must appreciate that they need a very vibrant city centre. And what a loss it would be if it wasn't a vibrant place for the whole of Northern Ireland. And they need to support their city centre, they need to support their retailers, they need to support their hospitality businesses as well. And I know I question myself when it's dead easy to sit at home and order something online when I know there's a shop in Belfast City Centre that needs me to go and buy that. So, you know, I think we should be challenging ourselves to do that. I also think that, Glyn talked about that mixed use in the city centre, and we've been talking about that for a long time. We know that that is the answer to any city centre, and what was happening even before COVID. We need more people living in our city, and we have about a seventh of the number of people living in our city as most cities of those size across these islands. So absolutely, we need that. We need to redevelop tourism again. And you know, one of the things that the council is bringing forward is a new visitor attraction right in the heart of the city centre to bring that footfall in and keep from international tourism and keep it within the city and get people to spend their money. And I think much more family space as well, much more, you know, playgrounds and different uses for the city to get that footfall up again.
Yeah, Boyd Park has just been redone.
It has, very colourful.
Very colourful, going past it. For my sins, I cover Belfast City Council meetings. I remember 2 years ago a councillor standing up and saying Belfast really needs a cafe-style culture, and I remember it being just derided. We don't have that relationship with alcohol here. This isn't France, this isn't Spain. Yet, this summer, you literally walk past, even we're into October now, people are still venturing out and sitting outside in a bar, and it is, ironically, a bit like a cafe culture, funny enough. So what have you made?
Look, and that's here to stay. I mean, again, it's back to that. There are positives, you know, hard to find in this pandemic, but there are positives. You know, people are working differently together, you know, trade bodies, councils, government, not always agreeing, but we're in the room and we're seeing changes that will stay, and that's key. We need to innovate, but we still need to actually make sure we preserve the businesses that are viable. It's not market failure, this is COVID failure. I mean, there are businesses, we're in a transition in our city centres and they will change, but there are lots of viable businesses now that will be key to that new city centre and indeed that new Northern Ireland when we get to the other side of this, which will come.
Yeah, I think it's about creative repurposing of our city centre. I think that is absolutely key. It's about making sure that we provide an experience for the shopper, for the visitor, for the tourist. And, you know, increasingly this line between retail and hospitality is blurring. You know, in many respects, we're almost one sector now because it is all about creating that experience. And the city centre, it's more than just retail and hospitality. It's about all of those things together, providing a real experience. And I think that's where we need to get back to, you know. And I think that, yeah, there has been some innovation. Just look at Ann Street, the way it has been completely repurposed at night. Now, I know some of Colin's guys got into trouble for the way they've done it, but but that was a side I've never thought I would see in Belfast City Centre. It wasn't Paris by no means, but
It was better.
Well, it was better, yeah. But so I do think that ultimately I am optimistic that, you know, it's not just a naive statement saying, oh, Belfast bounced back, we've gone through the troubles and Primark and all the rest. I do think that, you know, with some of the exciting projects that we have in the system, you know, I know that Tribeca has got into has got permission now. I mean, we've engaged with Tribeca, I mean, about changing how the retail elements of it, where they're moving away from an anchor tenant. Instead, they're keen to get independent retailers to locate in their site. You know, they're thinking very much more Carnaby Street than Victoria Square in terms of the model that we've done. Mm-hmm. We've got what's happening in Sirocco, we've got Ulster University, and all those are potential game changers. And, you know, what I think the big challenge is in term, people say, oh, we need less retail in the city centre. And in one sense, you're right, but it's the type of retail you want. So what we want to see, and I know this is shared by the council, is more independent retailers that offer something really different, distinctive. And I think it's about how we can create the space and for those retailers, new start retailers, many of them, to locate. So I think that's going to be the important of diversifying our retail offer and making it different.
Yeah,
so
and also those big footfall drivers as well, to maintain them in your city centre. So like the Primarks of this world that you just talked about, for example, really, really important to drive footfall. And just to go back to your comment about council and cafe culture, actually the difference this time was that we were actively out there encouraging it, streamlining the licences, knocking doors and saying, why aren't you out in the street? So there's a real change.
I mean,
for you.
it is interesting about, you know, obviously city centre trade had taken a dip, but really in August it did seem, probably with Help Out Eat Out and things like that, it did seem to be kind of coming back to
there's no doubt Help Out Eat Out, you know, what was huge, but just back to the Glyn thing, is ecosystem. So it was the fact, you know, there were shops there, they were open again, because now people go shop, it's socialising. To quote Wallace, the great writers of Wallace and Gromit, it's a grand day out, you know, and that's what we need to offer. But, you know, it's not just an ecosystem within the centre, it's Belfast supports the ecosystem of Northern Ireland. Yeah. The hospitality industry supports the ecosystem. Even within agriculture, we buy a third of Northern Ireland's agri-food. You know, so it's all layered in there. A strong Belfast City Centre, strong other town centres, support the baker, the butcher and the candlestick maker in every village in the province.
Okay. Suzanne, I just want to focus a little bit on kind of the opportunities that are coming down the track. I know something that you're passionate about and you helped actually deliver for us is that obviously we've got the city deal coming down the track. Are there many, in terms of that, can COVID hinder the impact of that, do you think, or are there ways enough to pivot around this?
I actually think that it is a key tool, really, because it's £1 billion worth of investment, okay, from the public sector that the private sector then will invest alongside, right? And it's a perfect tool to aid and accelerate recovery, in my view, because what are we investing in? We're investing in infrastructure, okay, to help people get about more easily. We're investing in new tourism product, whether that's from the moorings to Bangor waterfront to what I talked about in our own city centre in Belfast. And we're investing in digital infrastructure. Well, hey, who needs digital infrastructure these days? Everybody does, right? And that's really important. And we're investing then in innovation, which you talked about earlier. So, and I think that's the most exciting bit, because if you look at the future of the economy of cities, we're all going to be competing, clearly. We all have to really focus on the sectors that are going to grow in the future, particularly in the knowledge economy side and the green tech side of things. And these innovation centres that we're going to invest in with the universities then will commercialise their research and their ideas and their products, and small business companies will start up around them, and bigger companies will come in as well and locate alongside that. And there's another ecosystem that we're trying to create, and that's about job generation. That's really what is at the heart.
Buy their coffee,
city
their
deal.
lunch, and all
Precisely.
Yeah.
I think the city deals, we've been big fans of it because we see them as a catalyst for regeneration. And I think that it is a potential game changer for the city. But I think as well, we shouldn't also, there are some positives in this. We've seen as well that many of the arterial routes, if I can call it, the likes of Ormer Road, Ballyhackamore, Belmont, Antrim Road and so on, have been doing quite well. I mean, not fantastically well, but they have, I suppose, developed a complementary offer to the city centre as well. And I think it's important that we develop them to their full potential. So I think that I think that they are what we're seeing in the likes of Ballyhackamore. At times you wouldn't think there's a pandemic on, and maybe I'll get in trouble for saying that. I know my office is there, but it is good to see that you're seeing. We talked about that innovation, that drive, and it's there. And of course, if there's any example of the successful partnership between retail and hospitality, it's Ballyhackamore.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, we go back to that. It's natural. Everyone west of the M50 in the south looks at Dublin and says, "Oh, they get too much." Go down the M1 here, go past Lisburn. Most people say, "Well, Belfast gets too much." Do you think that maybe this pandemic has maybe did away with that kind of silo mentality and about, because you mentioned what's good for Belfast is kind of good for the rest of the north. So do you think maybe that's kind of gone away?
I hope so. It's back to that changing attitudes, changing perceptions. I think it's back. There's a poem that talks about we're all in this together, but we're in different boats.
Yes.
I think we just had to make sure all the boats are pointing in the same direction. And when it comes to hospitality, Belfast doesn't get too much, because I have amazing pubs, restaurants and hotels in every town and village in this province.
Okay. So
I don't think it's an either or, right?
Okay.
And I think that's what we're sometimes guilty of, It's about both. It's about how we raise all of Northern Ireland or the North.
Yeah.
But the city has a specific role, or cities, because there's more than one, clearly, have a specific role because there is an agglomeration economy. Whether we like it or not, that's what happens. And, the vibrancy of cities brings the young people or keeps the talent here as well. And that's really important factor within this too. And you do get co-location of businesses, and that's where you get innovation, etc. So I think we have to appreciate that. We have to appreciate then the supply chains out in the rest of the areas as well. But I do think going forward, the executive has to have that conversation about what is a regionally balanced economy.
Mm-hmm. Glyn.
Yeah, and I think that, one of the things that why we're so, I suppose, enthusiastic for pushing for this High Street Task Force is that we need to get a better coordinated approach to policy to town and city centres and high streets. So, that's bringing the infrastructure, communities, economy, finance. So it's getting things like infrastructure right, it's getting things like business rates, which, is a big issue, which we I know it's been kicked into touch with the rates holiday, but the executive need to completely redraft and rethink the whole system of business rates, which is a dead hand to our retail and economy sectors as a whole. But what I would say is that it is important that we get a coordinated approach to town and city centres and high streets, and that's where I think this High Street Task Force has an important role, that everybody, as Colin says, is pushing in the one direction. And I think it is about how do we create that 21st century high street? What does success look like in terms of a short-term recovery? And that's where I think what business needs to be in, the space business needs to be in, is that we should be driving that agenda. We should be bringing forward solutions and new ideas and new thinking, and not just simply reacting to every crisis that comes along, whether it's a pandemic or pre-mark. We need to be much more proactive and solution-based, because the rules have been rewritten around the economy now. The world has changed fundamentally, and likewise our economy as well. So this sort of paradigm shift that people have talked about, business needs to be the driving force, the innovators, the new thinking, and developing a solution-based approach to policy is where business needs to be at. And I think the strongest voices and advocates have been the trade bodies, where we're driving. Colin and I and Manufacturing and I are part of a group called Trade and I. We produced a 10-year plan, Vision 2030, talks about creating 65,000 new jobs, about making Northern Ireland an ecosystem of innovation. So I think what we do need to get is that sort of long-term thinking about where the economy needs to be by 2030, what sort of changes do we need to make. And I think it is about, isn't changing the narrative around the economy and how we have seen it. And the pandemic has increased that process, it's increased that need for radical and systemic change.
And that just, really is an example of how government and business absolutely need to work hand in hand. So the government really, and includes ourselves in this at the local level, really need to create the right environment that can happen. They need to listen to business. They need to support business then in bringing forward some of those ideas and making sure they're deliverable.
A practical example there, I think it is bizarre why councils have not got their regeneration powers. And I think that that would enable councils to be much more active in terms of that recovery piece if they had regeneration. What's the point of giving councils power over planning, economic development, but don't give them powers of regeneration? So that's something the executive could do straight away, is give the councils the regeneration powers to enable them, if you like, to have more skin in the game in terms of that recovery process. I think that is an early action point that could be done, and give the councils a greater say in that process.
And I would take them tomorrow.
And I'll give a quick final thought to you, Colin.
Look, I mean, we're in a pandemic. Government is working incredibly hard. We know that. But look, they need to base all their decisions on evidence. And if it's a fast decision, scrutiny straight after. The future of the hospitality is in their hands. I appeal to them, please handle carefully.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was an absolutely fascinating conversation. I just want to give another thanks to my guests, Glyn Roberts, Suzanne Wylie and Colin Neill. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Slugger TV, hosted in partnership with Ulster Bank as part of our Reset series. If you want to catch other parts of the series, you can check out the articles on sluggerotool.com. Thank you very much for watching.